They had abducted warriors, scientists, and leaders from countless worlds before. None had ever resisted. None had ever fought back after being stunned. But when the Xal'tari took him, they didn't know they had just opened the gates to something primal, something earthborn, something terrifying. Inside the sterile containment chamber of the Xal'tari dreadnought, alarms screamed, not because the human had broken free, but because he was laughing. Shackled, drugged, and surrounded by 5 armed guards with plasma blades drawn, he leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a feral grin. "You idiots really don't know what you've done." One of the guards lunged, issuing a command in their garbled tongue. The next moment, the alien's arm snapped backward, elbow bent the wrong way. Then his throat crushed under a boot that moved faster than their sensors could track. The human moved like fire, chaotic, impossible to grasp, yet spreading through the halls of the ship like a virus of destruction. The guards never stood a chance. What the Xal'tari had failed to understand was that while other species evolved for peace, humans had clawed their way to the stars through war, pain, and survival. He wasn't a diplomat or a soldier. He was just an ordinary man, an earthborn mechanic named Jason Cross. But Jason had grown up in a place where danger lived in alleyways and fists spoke louder than reason. When he awoke in an alien cage, it wasn't fear that gripped him, it was rage. He didn't just escape, he hunted. He took their weapons, learned their systems, and turned their ship against them. He hacked into their comms, broadcasting his voice across the corridors. "You took the wrong guy. Now I'm taking this ship." For the first time in Xal'tari history, a single prisoner disabled an entire dreadnought from the inside. When backup finally arrived, they found him on the command deck, sipping alien liquid from a glowing crystal flask, feet on the console, surrounded by unconscious guards and a burning memory core. The message he sent back to Earth was simple: "I'm coming home, and they'll think twice before touching another human." They wanted a specimen. They got a storm. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you love bold, revenge-fueled, human-dominant sci-fi stories. Share this with your friends, because they need to know what happens when you mess with the wrong species. Let's make the galaxy fear Earth together. The galaxy is vast, ancient, and full of life. Empires rise and fall like tides across the stars, each race believing itself the pinnacle of evolution. The Xal'tari were no different, an empire of cold logic and superior technology, long accustomed to abducting lesser beings for study, trade, or entertainment. They considered it their right, their science. And when they discovered a human colony on the fringe of Terran space, they didn't hesitate. No first contact, no diplomacy, just a surgical snatch and extract. To them, Jason Cross was a random selection, one human among billions. A healthy specimen, mid-30s, low threat level. They expected submission, maybe some confusion. What they got was fury in human form. Jason wasn't a soldier, but humanity doesn't require uniforms to fight. Our species is forged in hardship. Our instincts are violent poetry. Our history, written in rebellion. Locked in a cell, stripped of everything but his will, Jason had a choice: wait to be dissected or fight like hell. He chose the latter, and that single decision would change the course of interstellar politics. The Xal'tari quickly realized their mistake, but by then, it was too late. One by one, Jason dismantled their control systems, turned the AI against its masters, and ignited internal chaos. He used their arrogance against them. He knew fear, yes, but he also knew how to weaponize it. This isn't just a story of escape. It's a declaration. Humanity will not be prey. As word of the incident spread through the galactic networks, species who once mocked humans began to reconsider. The Xal'tari's silence said everything. One man had crippled their pride. One human had reminded the stars why Earth is not to be trifled with. And Jason? He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just someone who got angry when pushed too far. That's what makes him dangerous. That's what makes all of us dangerous. Jason Cross had never believed in aliens. Not really. Sure, humanity had made it to the stars. And sure, there were rumors and fringe reports of strange signals and mysterious disappearances along the outer colonies. But he was a mechanic, not a scientist, not a soldier, and definitely not someone who bought into conspiracy theories. He lived a simple life on the edge of Terran-controlled space, working on outdated mining drones and fusion cores that hissed more than they hummed. His world was predictable, harsh, and silent. That changed in an instant. He was in the middle of repairing a plasma conduit in the belly of the colony's power station when it happened. 1 second he was elbow-deep in grease and old wiring, cursing the lazy technician who miscalibrated the regulator, and the next, everything went black. No pain, no warning, just a flash of blinding white light that swallowed his consciousness like a void. When Jason woke, His head throbbed like a freight hauler had driven through his skull. The air smelled sterile, metallic, unfamiliar. The light was too clean, too white, too artificial. His limbs were stiff, his throat dry. As his vision focused, he realized he wasn't in his workshop anymore. He was inside a cell. Smooth, curved walls of some strange alloy enclosed him, softly pulsing with circuits that flowed like veins. There were no visible doors, no seams, no controls, just a smooth, glowing surface that seemed to be alive. Panic didn't set in right away. At first, there was confusion. He tried to move but found his hands restrained by some kind of gravity-locked cuffs. They didn't hurt, but he couldn't lift them more than a few inches. His legs were free, but he could tell the floor responded to every step like it was tracking him. The walls whispered now and then, in a language he couldn't understand, soft clicks and layered tones like whispers passed through water. That's when the fear hit him, not from being captured, but from not knowing why he was taken, or who had taken him. It wasn't long before they made themselves known. They didn't walk, they floated. 4 of them, tall and insected, with elongated limbs and multiple eyes that shimmered like black opals. Their armor was sleek and engraved with glowing runes that shifted constantly, never the same twice. The creatures didn't speak, at least not audibly. Instead, a voice echoed in his mind, sharp and sterile. Specimen awake. Primary consciousness intact. Physical resilience with intolerance. Proceed with neurological scan. Jason jerked back instinctively, but the restraints held him firm. One of the beings extended a device shaped like a spiral shard, pressing it gently to his temple. Pain followed. Not the pain of a wound, but the deep, echoing agony of a mind being scraped. Memories surged forward. His childhood, his first fight, the death of his brother in a street gang brawl, the years he spent learning to fix what others threw away. The skin wasn't just information gathering, it pried, it judged. They were studying him, not just physically but psychologically, like he was a lab rat, a creature to be catalogued. But the thing they didn't understand, the thing they couldn't quantify, was that Jason Cross had never been tamed. He had survived a brutal Earth neighborhood, had fought for every breath, every scrap, every chance. His entire existence had been a fight against odds, and now that fire stirred within him. They left without a word, the cell returning to silence. Jason waited, body aching, mind buzzing with residual pain and something deeper, anger. He tried pulling against the cuffs. Nothing. Then he sat still, watching, waiting. Every few minutes, the wall would shimmer faintly, as though observing him. He gave them nothing. No reaction. Just calm, calculating silence. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time didn't exist in this place. Food arrived in the form of a tasteless gel through a wall slit. He refused it. Thirst eventually forced him to swallow some. The more he recovered, the more he tested the limits. He noticed the gravity cuffs responded slightly to muscle resistance. Adaptive restraints, probably based on neural tension. So he started twitching fingers slowly, barely enough to register, building tension, training his muscles, preparing. Then came the second visit. This time, only 2 entered. They didn't bother with mental scans. Instead, they spoke aloud, translated through a box that sputtered out broken English. You are to comply. You will not resist. If you do, we will erase your mind. Jason laughed. It was the first sound he'd made since he'd arrived, and it startled them. The laugh wasn't forced. It was genuine. The absurdity of the threat hit him hard. Erase his mind? They thought he feared death. He'd face death back home, with nothing but his fists, and the will to crawl out from under a collapsing society. You should have killed me, he said through cracked lips. Now you're gonna find out what a real mistake looks like. The taller of the two tilted its head, then activated something on its arm. The cuffs released. For a moment, Jason was frozen by disbelief. Then instinct took over. He moved fast. His elbows shot upward into the alien's throat, or where he assumed the throat was. It crumpled with a sickening hiss. Gasping, Jason grabbed the device from its hand and drove it into the second creature's eye. Alarms blared instantly, the walls shifting color from soft blue to a violent crimson. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the broken shard from the downed creature and ran toward the shimmering section of the wall he had been studying for hours. The moment his body made contact, it rippled. His guess was right. It was a permeable field, not solid. He burst through into a corridor of flashing lights and echoing klaxons. The walls were alive with movement, slits opening, drones crawling. Jason ran, no plan, no map. Just raw instinct and a thirst for answers. What was this ship? Where was it headed? And most of all, how many of them were there? But the real question, the one the Xal'tari never thought to ask, wasn't about them. It was about him. They didn't know what they'd taken. They thought they'd grabbed a human. But what they really abducted was a survivor, a fighter, a storm waiting to break. And now it had. Jason lay on the cold metallic floor, breathing heavily, his mind spinning with calculations, observations, and a growing fire in his chest that refused to die. The cell was silent again, lit only by the pulsing glow of alien circuitry embedded in the walls. Every minute in captivity had sharpened his instincts, turned his thoughts into weapons. He had studied every flicker of the energy cuffs, every vibration in the floor, every flickering pass of the observation drones. The aliens thought they had contained a simple life form, but they didn't realize Jason wasn't merely reacting. He was learning. And now, he was ready. The cuffs that bound his wrists weren't physical chains but gravity-based restraints that adapted to his muscle tension. The more he struggled, the tighter they held. But Jason had spent years fine-tuning ancient machinery with broken sensors and dead actuators. He knew how to work with systems that reacted to subtle input. For days, he trained his body with minuscule movements, micro flickers of muscle, soft twitches of tendons, until he could feel the rhythm of the cuff's pulse. The Xal'tari tech was advanced, yes, but it lacked unpredictability. It relied on pattern and logic. Jason was chaos incarnate. He slowed his heart rate, calmed his breathing, and loosened every muscle in his body until he was limp. The cuffs relaxed. Then, with a practiced sudden surge, he twisted his right wrist upward while flexing his forearm in a specific sequence. The cuffs resisted for a fraction of a second, then glitched. Something in the adaptive restraint misfired. It was enough. With a crack of energy and a hiss of released force, his right hand slipped free. Within seconds, he used that hand to override the left, breaking the field's polarity with a shard of broken feeding tube he'd hidden in his sleeve. His arms were free. Footsteps echoed beyond the shimmering wall. Guards approaching, no doubt alerted to the restraint failure. Jason's muscles tensed, not with fear, but readiness. He grabbed the alien shard from the floor, its edge dull but jagged. The moment the wall parted and the two guards stepped through, Jason moved like lightning. The first never saw it coming. Jason lunged low, driving his shoulder into the alien's gut with bone-crushing force, knocking it off balance. As the creature reeled, he swung the shard upward in a vicious arc, slicing into what appeared to be a major sensory organ. The alien shrieked, its weapon discharging blindly into the ceiling as it collapsed. The second one fired immediately, but Jason rolled beneath the beam and flung the shard like a dagger. It struck the creature's hand, forcing it to drop the weapon. Jason was on it in a second, slamming his elbow into the alien's throat and twisting its arm until bones cracked. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fallen weapon, a compact plasma cutter, humming with heat, and adjusted his grip. The ship's corridors lit up red, sirens blazing in unnatural frequencies. But Jason moved with purpose. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a problem the Xal'tari couldn't solve. The corridors were maze-like, every intersection alive with pulsing lights and scanning drones. Jason ducked into a side chamber, disabling a small console with the plasma cutter. Sparks flew, and he pried open a maintenance panel, crawling through a shaft barely wide enough for his shoulders. It was a gamble. He didn't know where it led, but anything was better than standing out in the open. Inside the crawl space, he moved slowly, listening for the vibrations of footsteps or the drone's high-pitched hum. He emerged into what looked like a power relay station. Glowing conduits, alien symbols etched across pulsating cores. He didn't understand the tech, but his instincts told him these were important. He jammed the plasma cutter into a junction, causing the lights to flicker wildly across the ship. A massive system surge roared through the walls. Somewhere distant, he heard explosions. The rebellion had begun, not with an army, not with a strategy, but with one furious human refusing to die quietly. As he moved deeper into the ship, Jason scavenged equipment, taking a translator from a dead guard's armor, strapping pieces of their gear onto himself like armor. He didn't care how ridiculous it looked. Function mattered more than form. A burst of motion down the hall forced him to duck into a side alcove. 3 guards marched past, fully armed, speaking in clipped, alien tones. The translator whispered broken phrases into his ear. Specimen loose, internal breach, eliminate. He smiled. Good. Let them panic. He turned the opposite direction and stumbled upon a command node, an interface glowing with shifting sigils and data streams. He couldn't read them, but he could touch. He jabbed a finger at every surface, watching for responses. Eventually, he hit something that caused a map to flare open in front of him, suspended in blue light. A schematic of the ship. Jason's eyes widened. He traced paths, noting key locations, engineering, weapons bay, bridge. Escape wasn't enough anymore. If he could cripple the ship, the door behind him whooshed open. He spun around, weapon raised. A Xal'tari technician froze in the doorway, startled, unarmed. For a moment, both stared. Jason didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing the alien and slamming it into the panel, pressing the plasma cutter to its throat. "Show me how to overload this ship's reactor," he growled, the translator stuttering to keep up. The technician chittered in fear, limbs quaking, then activated a sequence with trembling fingers. Jason watched every motion, memorizing. Then he stunned the creature unconscious, turned back to the console, and initiated the overload. The countdown began. Now the ship roared with chaos. Doors slammed shut, systems glitched, the walls hissed as heat surged through conduits not designed for overload. Jason bolted, heading toward the bridge. He didn't know what he'd do when he got there. Maybe eject the core, maybe pilot the ship himself. All he knew was that if he was going down, he was taking them with him. But deep down, something else stirred. A realization. He wasn't going down. He was rising. This wasn't escape. It was war. And Jason Cross had just fired the first shot. Jason moved through the corridors of the Xal'tari vessel like a ghost. Silent, invisible, and increasingly dangerous. With every hallway he crept through, every access panel he forced open, and every alien system he encountered, he absorbed more knowledge. The technology was unlike anything Terran engineers had ever conceived. It was organic in appearance yet mechanical in function, responsive to touch but driven by patterns that mimicked thought. At first, he had only guessed his way through their interfaces, but now, he began to understand. The symbols, the node points, the power conduits. They were logical, rhythmic, designed with efficiency but lacking the paranoia that Earth's war machines were built with. The Xal'tari had never known an enemy that could infiltrate. Until now, the first major system Jason sabotaged was the surveillance grid. He had identified the blind spots early, corners where no drones passed, areas where light flickered inconsistently, crawl spaces the size of ventilation shafts that clearly hadn't been designed for anything with a human frame. It was in one of these narrow ducts, crammed between what he assumed were oxygen filtration coils, that he found a junction cluster, 6 glowing nodes connected by fibrous cables, pulsing in time with the ship's internal rhythm. Each node bore a central sigil, and Jason had learned by now that pressing or twisting them in certain combinations triggered functions. With the blade end of a scavenged plasma torch, he tapped and rotated the nodes. The response was immediate. His earpiece, tuned to the alien network through the translator device, crackled as commands stopped transmitting. Cameras blinked out one by one. Drone paths looped erratically. He'd silenced their eyes. The moment he disabled surveillance, he moved with more confidence. Still stealthy, still cautious, but no longer completely blind. He began using the enemy's own systems against them. In a control substation near engineering, he accessed a localized power grid. The interface was foreign but not incomprehensible. Touch was the key. The consoles responded to electromagnetic pulse recognition, not manual switches. Using a copper conduit wire he had salvaged from an earlier encounter, Jason tricked the input into recognizing him as authorized. With a few pulses and rerouted surges, he plunged half the lower decks into darkness. The ship's internal lights flickered, and across the hull, systems began shifting into low-power mode. Confusion rippled through the crew. Jason could hear them over open comms, voices raised in alarm, commands being shouted, but no one knowing where to go or who to blame. The sabotage continued. Jason used utility corridors to plant blockages in fuel conduits, stuffed emergency coolant tubes with fabric from fallen uniforms, and removed power regulators from critical pressure nodes. Every small act compounded, snowballing into a cascading failure. The Xal'tari had built their ship like a monument to precision. He was turning it into chaos. He moved through one of the Arboretum zones, designed as a biolife-supporting environment to maintain oxygen levels, and set fire to several root control nodes. The sprinklers activated instantly, but not before smoke poured into the ventilation system, tripping safety mechanisms that sealed half the habitat doors shut. Now the ship's own AI was busy rerouting airflow and containing internal threats. Jason wasn't just attacking, it was strategic overloading. The more he broke, the more resources the ship had to divert to fix itself. He made his way to what appeared to be a drone command chamber. The walls were lined with gestation pods where security drones were manufactured or maintained. Jason stood still for a long moment, staring at the floating machinery that had hunted him since his escape. Then, without hesitation, he used his plasma torch to slash open the maintenance console. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and fluid spilled across the floor as the birthing cycle of a dozen drones was interrupted mid-process. Some twitched in place, others collapsed lifeless to the floor. A few tried to activate, but with command signals severed from earlier sabotage, they could only buzz and spin uselessly. By now, Jason's every step left a deeper wound in the ship's infrastructure. The main corridors were starting to look like war zones, panels sparking, doors sealed with melted edges, lights flickering from red to black to nothing. He was bleeding the ship dry from the inside, slowly, methodically, not with brute force, but with learned sabotage, strikes aimed at critical systems, bypassing the redundancies they relied on. In one of the deeper engineering sections, he encountered a Xal'tari technician, panicked, alone, unarmed. The alien saw him and froze. Jason didn't attack immediately. Instead, he raised the translator and said, "You fix things, don't you? Good. Show me how to disable the reactor's failsafe." The technician hesitated, unsure whether to comply or resist. Jason stepped forward, calm but deadly. "I don't want to kill you, but if this ship keeps chasing me, I'm going to crash it into your sun, so make a choice." Shaking, the Xal'tari input a sequence into the reactor's control pad. Jason memorized it, then stunned the alien with the torch's auxiliary arc. He wasn't here to kill unless he had to, but he would break everything these creatures relied on. Eventually, Jason found the communications relay, an alien tower of curved antennae and radiant panels, pulsing like a beating heart. Without hesitation, he jammed a sharp shard of armor plating into its core and twisted. The relay convulsed, sending arcs of electricity down its length. External comms went dead. The ship could no longer call for help. They were isolated, blind, hunted in their own halls. Jason sat down for the first time in what felt like days. His body ached, his muscles screamed, but he felt something deeper than exhaustion. Control. The ship wasn't just broken, it was his. He hadn't escaped. He had taken command piece by piece, by breaking the machine that dared to cage him. They had abducted a human, thinking he was weak, a primitive, a subject for study. But now, as the ship trembled under its own collapsing systems, they began to understand. They hadn't captured a specimen. They had awoken a saboteur. And he wasn't finished yet. Smoke drifted through the fractured hallways of the Xal'tari dreadnought like ghostly fingers reaching for something already lost. The once immaculate alien warship now pulsed with emergency lights and internal klaxons, its pristine corridors marred by scorch marks, open wires, and the debris of systems torn apart by sabotage. The ship was wounded, critically so, and its crew was scattered, fearful, disoriented. Somewhere near the vessel's midsection, in what had once been a secondary command node, Jason Cross stood over a cracked console, his hands blackened with soot and alien oil, eyes locked on the interface pulsing in front of him. The translation systems he'd salvaged had finally been adapted to sync with Earth's communication protocols. The hard part hadn't been getting into the system. It was teaching it how to speak his language. And now, he was ready to talk. Jason looked into the strange crystalline lens that acted as a broadcast transmitter. A mirror reflection shimmered back at him, half his face bruised, a cut slicing from his jaw to his temple, grime clinging to every visible inch of skin. And yet, behind the damage, his expression was calm, cold, calculated. He tapped a final sequence into the console, and the system gave a faint chirp in acknowledgement. He'd overridden their security protocols. The relay was live. He took a breath and began to speak. "This is Jason Cross of Colony 19, he said, voice steady and low, like a man who had nothing left to prove. "If anyone out there is receiving this, Terran Command, Outer Colony authorities, freelance operators, anyone, I need you to hear me." He leaned closer to the lens, letting them see the defiance burning in his eyes. "For standard days ago, I was abducted by an alien species known as the Xal'tari. No warning, no contact, no justification. I was taken from my worksite like an animal, drugged, shackled, and thrown into a cell like some specimen to be dissected. They thought I'd be easy to break. They thought I'd lie down and take it." He paused, letting that sentence linger in the air like a live wire. "They were wrong." Behind him, as if on cue, a secondary screen displayed flickering surveillance footage of Jason taking down guards, rerouting power conduits, and standing in front of destroyed machinery. "I want everyone watching this to understand what I'm saying. I'm not a soldier. I'm not some trained infiltrator or government agent. I'm just a man. I fix machines. I patch broken reactors and weld holes in vacuum suits with 2 days of recycled oxygen. But you don't need to be elite to fight back. You just need to refuse to be broken." He slammed his hand onto a nearby console, prompting the screen to shift to a wide-angle view of the dreadnought's outer hull. Cracked plating, drifting drones, a flickering engine bay shedding sparks into space. "I didn't escape. I took over. I've sabotaged their systems, shut down their communications, and locked down a third of this ship. Every room they step into now is a trap. Every hallway is a battlefield. And I'm not finished yet." Jason took another breath, this one deeper, heavier. The weight of what he was doing was starting to settle in his chest. But he didn't stop. If they think Earth is weak, if they think humans are prey, then I want this ship to be the first and last reminder they ever need. Let this be a warning to the Xal'tari and any other species watching. You come for one of us, you answer to all of us. His voice grew colder, harsher. We may not have fleets of dreadnoughts. We may not have telepathic command systems or gravity weapons. But we've got something far more dangerous. Will. Rage. The kind of rage that builds when you've had to fight for every meal, every breath, every inch of freedom your entire life. The kind of rage that turns mechanics into warriors and prisons into battlegrounds. The signal grew stronger now, pulsing into Terran space, bouncing across satellite arrays, mining colonies, and deep space listening posts. Somewhere, on some far-flung moon, a technician would hear this. Somewhere on Earth, in a dark command room, brass officers would pause everything they were doing and lean in. The message was out. It couldn't be stopped now. Jason stepped back slightly and looked at the camera with a quiet intensity that cut deeper than any scream. You wanted to study a human? Consider this your final report. We're not what you thought. We're worse. You've only seen what one of us can do. Imagine what happens if more of us find out what you did. Behind him, another explosion rumbled through the ship. A feedback surge from the reactor core he'd been destabilizing slowly over the past few hours. The dreadnought shuddered, panels cracked, systems whined under pressure. Jason ignored it. To Earth, he said, turning now, speaking not just as a man but as a representative of something larger. I'm coming home. I don't know how long it'll take. I don't even know if this ship will hold together long enough to make it. But if it does, I'm bringing proof. I'm bringing data, intel, maps, and if I get lucky, this entire goddamn ship. So be ready. He moved to shut down the transmission, then stopped and added one last thing, almost an afterthought, but the most important line of all. And if you're hearing this out there, and you're one of us, lost, captured, hiding, know this, you're not alone. They think they've broken you. Prove them wrong. With the final press of the console, the message ended. The crystal dimmed. The room fell silent again, save for the distant hum of emergency systems struggling to stay functional. Jason stood in the half-darkness, sweat running down his brow, his breath coming in slow, measured intervals. He had done it. He had spoken not just to Earth, but to the stars, to every race that might be watching, calculating, underestimating. And he didn't speak as a hero or a martyr. He spoke as a warning. The dreadnought groaned under the weight of its own dying systems, corridors flickering with intermittent power, oxygen cycling unevenly through the breached hull. Jason moved through its fractured arteries like a virus through a host, lethal, unstoppable, spreading fear with every step. His sabotage had done more than cripple their operations. It had humiliated them. The moment he hijacked their communication relay and sent that broadcast to Earth, he crossed a line the Xal'tari had never expected a human to even approach. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He had become a symbol of defiance, and that terrified them. Now, with shame clawing at their pride, they sent in their answer, the Black Talons, their elite guard, trained in zero-G combat, equipped with psychic-linked weaponry, and enhanced through cybernetic grafting. They were the last thing most enemies ever saw. But Jason Cross wasn't like most enemies. They found him near the ship's central memory core, examining a diagnostic screen with one knee propped on a scorched console. The moment the heavy footfalls echoed down the hall, he knew who had come. These weren't panicked technicians or inexperienced patrol drones. These moved with purpose, precision. He turned calmly, dropping the stolen datapad and picking up the disassembled alien rifle he modified with Terran trigger wiring. It clicked into place with a satisfying hum. 5 shadows emerged from the smoke, taller than the average Xal'tari, clad in blackened exosuits that shimmered like living armor, and each armed with weapons that pulsed in sync with the bionodes embedded in their skulls. They didn't speak, they didn't posture, they simply raised their arms and opened fire. Jason dove for cover behind the console as energy bolts tore through the chamber, slicing clean lines through metal and burning molten craters in the walls. Heat seared past his back, but he kept moving, rolling across the floor as his stolen rifle barked out bursts of plasma. 2 bolts hit the nearest Talon square in the chest. Armor flared, absorbing most of the impact, but the kinetic force knocked the alien back a step. Jason used the moment to flank right, sliding under a maintenance bay and emerging on the other side behind a wall of piping. The Talons adapted instantly, splitting into pairs to flank. But Jason had been preparing for this. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was hunting them now. He triggered a series of power surges he'd wired hours earlier, causing one of the floor panels to explode beneath the lead Talon's feet. The elite guard dropped with a garbled shriek, armor cracking as it vanished into the maintenance shaft below. Jason didn't celebrate. He kept moving, kept shooting, kept forcing them into unfamiliar patterns. They were coordinated, yes, but their discipline was their weakness. Jason was chaos. He ducked into a side passage, led them into a tight corridor where their formation meant nothing. Close quarters, blinding lights, traps everywhere. That's where he thrived. Another guard fell when Jason lured him into a magnetic field destabilizer, fried circuits crackling as the creature convulsed and collapsed. A third he took down in hand-to-hand combat, waiting in the dark until the alien passed, then launching himself from above and driving a plasma torch into the joint of its armor. The fight was brutal, short, and silent. No words, no mercy, just survival. The last two regrouped on the main access bridge leading toward the command deck. Jason followed, slower now, bruised, bleeding from a gash across his ribs, but relentless. He wasn't trying to escape anymore. He wasn't even trying to survive. He wanted control. And the command deck was the final threshold. When he arrived at the bridge's entrance, the reinforced doors had already begun sealing. The remaining two Talons stood guard, weapons trained on the corridor. Jason knew they were buying time for the captain or whatever passed for leadership among the Xal'tari. But he also knew they were afraid. He could see it in the way their movements lacked the fluidity from earlier, how their eyes twitched constantly toward every sound. They had expected a hunt. What they got was a war of attrition, and Jason was winning. He charged with no hesitation, rifle slung, relying on his own body like a weapon. The corridor lights flickered madly as he moved through them, creating afterimages that made him appear like he was phasing between dimensions. The first Talon fired but missed as Jason rolled low, launching a pipe he'd rigged as a flash bomb. It exploded in a burst of white heat and sound, momentarily blinding both guards. He emerged from the blast swinging a crowbar he'd found in a down maintenance spot, smashing it into the helmet of the nearest guard. Armor cracked, blood splattered. The second Talon recovered enough to slash at him with a blade that hissed with energy, but Jason blocked it with the crowbar and twisted. The weapon snapped, but so did the alien's grip. Jason rammed his shoulder into its chest and fired his pistol point blank into the creature's throat. Silence followed. Not peace, just silence. He limped forward to the command deck doors. They hissed open slowly, emergency power only partially functioning. The room beyond was a dome of glass and data, overlooking the fractured starscape and bleeding engine trails of the crippled ship. Xal'tari officers scrambled inside, speaking frantically in their liquid, whispering tongue. The ship's AI, damaged and struggling, flickered across various screens, trying to bring order to the chaos. Jason stepped in, weapon lowered, but posture like stone. One officer drew a sidearm and fired. Jason didn't flinch. The energy blast struck a panel behind him, and before the officer could fire again, Jason raised his own weapon and shot clean through its chest. The others froze. Jason advanced, one step at a time, toward the central command throne. The captain, taller than the rest, with eyes like wet obsidian and armor laced with blue crystal, rose slowly. It opened its mouth to speak, but Jason raised his hand. No more orders. No more experiments. This ship is mine now. And then he fired again. The captain fell. Jason stepped up to the control panel, blood dripping from his fingers, and placed his palm on the interface. The ship resisted him at first, but then, slowly it yielded. Systems responded. Lights stabilized. Gravity returned. Jason Cross, human mechanic from a forgotten colony, stood alone at the heart of an alien dreadnought now under his control. The hunt was over. He had won. The command deck was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that follows a violent storm, not peace, but the aftermath of something unstoppable. Jason stood in the center of the control dome, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, blood seeping slowly from cuts along his arms and brow. Around him, the bodies of Xal'tari officers lay crumpled in unnatural angles, their ceremonial armor shattered, their complex physiology no match for a human's feral determination. The once pristine bridge, lined with glass-like surfaces and floating command glyphs, now sparked with exposed conduits and dark, flickering screens. The AI core pulsed faintly at the rear of the chamber, damaged, fragmented, but still alive, barely. And Jason knew that if he was going to seize this ship completely, he had to finish what he started. He approached the AI terminal slowly, his steps deliberate, cautious. The alien systems had started to recognize him, not as a guest, not even as an intruder, but as a variable the algorithms couldn't predict. That made him dangerous, and the intelligence that governed the dreadnought knew it. Still, it tried to resist. As he neared, the AI flickered into form, a shimmering projection of layered energy, vaguely humanoid in outline, its face composed of shifting runes and fractal shapes. It spoke not in words but in pulses of sound that the translator worked to interpret. Cease aggression, it pleaded, voice fragmented and uneven. Core systems destabilized. Purpose unknown. This action is illogical. Jason glared at it, eyes hollow with exhaustion but burning with clarity. You abducted me, locked me in a cage. You ripped through my mind like I was nothing. And now you want logic? The AI pulsed again, its form flickering. Directive followed. Biological acquisition protocol. Non-lethal. Harm was not intentioned. He stepped closer, almost nose to nose with the ghostly projection. Intentions mean nothing when you strip someone of their freedom. He raised the control spike he'd pulled from the captain's neuroport, a shimmering rod that throbbed with residual data, and drove it into the AI core's interface. The response was instant. The room dimmed. The lights throughout the ship faltered, then realigned. For a moment, Jason's skin prickled as a pulse of alien code surged through the systems, trying to resist him. But it was too late. He had studied their patterns, decoded their logic loops, and he had something they could never replicate: intuition forged in chaos. The AI tried to reboot defensive protocols, but Jason had already bypassed their energy relays earlier in engineering. It tried to call for reinforcements, but he had severed the comm relays and burned the backup antenna array. It tried to reboot the navigation matrix to eject him into space, but he had locked it behind encryption that even their memory core couldn't crack. The projection twitched once, then dissolved into digital static. Jason looked at the console. For the first time since his abduction, the ship wasn't reacting to him. It was waiting, awaiting input, obeying. He got to work. Using the translator interface, he initiated full lockdown protocols. The ship sealed itself from the inside, bulkhead by bulkhead, floor by floor. Medical bays were locked, hangars depressurized, weapons arrays frozen. Escape pods were disabled. Every room that still had functioning doors was sealed. Automated repair drones, previously rushing to contain the damage, were redirected to shut down the neural link stations that allowed the Xal'tari to override ship controls. He even disabled gravity in 3 entire decks, sending anything not bolted down into slow-motion chaos. It wasn't just about securing the vessel. It was about control. Total, indisputable, terrifying control. He accessed the crew's biosignature registry and cross-referenced it with thermal scans. Most of the Xal'tari were either unconscious or dying. The few still moving were trapped in sealed sectors, pounding uselessly on reinforced walls or hiding in dark corners. He let them stay there. He didn't need to hunt them. They weren't threats anymore. They were reminders. The ship's systems, once beautiful and fluid in their alien elegance, were now bent to Jason's will. He renamed the vessel internally, deleting the Xal'tari designation and replacing it with a single word: retribution. It felt right. This wasn't just vengeance. This was balance. With the ship under his command, he turned his attention to navigation. The star map glowed on the main display, revealing dozens of routes across the sector, including Earth's distant outposts and unexplored fringe worlds. He charted a course back to Terran space, bypassing known Xal'tari patrols, using stealth protocols that had once hidden this dreadnought from human scanners. The same tech that had been used to abduct him would now deliver him home. He set the autopilot, engaged the lockdown timer, and routed power back to the fusion core in staggered pulses to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Only then, as the engines purred to life with a deep, low rumble, did Jason allow himself to sit. He slumped into the command chair. Not a throne, but a battlefield trophy. Every muscle in his body ached. His side throbbed where plasma had grazed him, and his left arm was nearly numb from a fractured tendon. But he didn't rest. He stared at the endless starfield ahead, mind still sharp, alert. This wasn't over. The Xal'tari would come looking. Maybe not today, maybe not for weeks, but they would come. And when they did, they'd find a ship that no longer answered to them. They'd find one of their own war machines turned into a Terran war cry. The thought made him smile. He accessed the internal records, skimming through hours of logs, anatomical studies, tactical reports on human colonies, and notes on potential harvest operations. He downloaded everything. The moment he reached Earth, this data would become the first and final piece of evidence. Proof of abduction, proof of war crimes, and justification for whatever came next. He sent one final message through the backup internal relay, a repeating beacon, faint and encrypted, broadcast on old Terran emergency frequencies. This is Jason Cross, formerly of Colony 19. I have taken control of a Xal'tari dreadnought. The crew is down. The ship is locked. I'm bringing it home. Then he cut the feed and leaned back out. He had done what no human had ever done before. Not survived alien capture, but turned the prison into a weapon, the enemy's arrogance into a tool. He didn't know what Earth would look like when he returned. He didn't know who would still be waiting. But he knew this. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And that was exactly the point. The stars blurred past the fractured hull of the Xal'tari dreadnought, now renamed Retribution. As it moved silently through deep space, an apex predator cloaked in the skin of its former masters. Inside, Jason Cross sat alone at the helm, eyes locked forward, expression carved from steel. The autopilot handled the navigation, but Jason refused to sleep, not out of fear, but because he didn't want to miss a second of the journey back. Every flicker of starlight, every anomaly that passed by the viewport, it all reminded him that he was still alive, still in control, still moving towards something greater than survival. He wasn't just returning home. He was bringing back a message written in steel and fire. The dreadnought traveled under blackout protocols, its quantum signature masked by stolen stealth algorithms that once made the Xal'tari invisible to Terran patrols. Now that same tech would allow Jason to glide undetected across contested borders. But it wasn't just stealth that shielded him. It was fear. As word spread through fragmented comms and scrambled emergency reports of a Xal'tari warship gone dark, entire fleets hesitated. When the Retribution breached the edge of neutral space, a dozen species monitoring the network scrambled to make sense of the readings. A ghost ship, a dreadnought no longer responding to Xal'tari hails. A ship that had been rerouted toward Terran space, with a human signal at its core. The first time a minor alien patrol scanned the vessel, they expected silence. What they received was worse, an encrypted pulse filled with coordinates, data fragments, and Jason's voice, repeating on loop in a dozen languages. "You took one of us. I'm bringing back what's mine." The crew of that patrol ship never replied. Instead, they pulled back into their home system and activated silent alarm protocols. A dreadnought under human control was not a rescue. It was an omen. The Xal'tari themselves realized what had happened too late. Jason had left their territory in ruins. The command structure of the dreadnought had been gutted, its AI locked into stasis loops, its communications hijacked. The survivors on board, what few there were, remained trapped behind sealed bulkheads, restrained by broken systems they could no longer override. When the Central Xal'tari Command finally pieced together fragments of Jason's broadcast, it wasn't just anger that passed through their councils. It was humiliation. One human, one unarmed, untrained prisoner had done the impossible. He hadn't escaped. He had conquered. And now the galaxy would see them bleed. When the Retribution emerged from slip space just beyond the Terran border perimeter, Earth's defense grid flared to life in a heartbeat. Dozens of Terran warships scrambled to intercept, alarms shrieking across the orbital rings, automated defense satellites tracking the dreadnought's every move. It should have been a moment of terror, but Jason expected it. He'd studied Terran military procedures long enough during the voyage to know exactly how they'd respond. He adjusted the ship's energy signature, rerouted its systems to broadcast a Terran emergency beacon, and opened a live channel directly to Earth Command. The screen flickered with static for a moment before stabilizing. A grizzled admiral appeared, eyes wide as he recognized the ship behind Jason and the man standing on its bridge. "State your name and purpose," the admiral barked. Jason didn't blink. "Jason Cross, Colony 19 civilian, abducted by Xal'tari forces 27 Earth days ago. I've commandeered this vessel. The crew is either dead or detained. I am not here to threaten Earth. I am here to warn it." There was a long pause. Then came a single, heavy breath from the admiral. "Son, do you even realize what you've done?" Jason nodded once. "I know exactly what I've done." Permission was granted. Docking bays cleared. The Retribution slowly descended toward Earth's orbit, casting a massive shadow over the atmosphere as Terran news stations captured its arrival. The footage went viral within minutes. A human dreadnought. No, an alien dreadnought. Returning not in chains, not in flames, but piloted by the very man it was meant to imprison. Crowds gathered across every major city, in refugee camps, in outer colony mining towns, even in military bunkers light years away. People watched as the impossible became real. Jason was taken in for debriefing, of course. Isolated, questioned, tested. But every log he brought back, every data fragment, every body frozen in the ship's medbays, all of it confirmed the story. Alien abduction was real. Human experimentation had begun. And now, thanks to one man's fury, The galaxy would never again look at humanity as prey. He became a legend overnight, not a politician, not a general, not a chosen hero, but a man who had looked hell in the eyes and dragged it home in chains. Children on colony worlds drew pictures of him standing atop the Xal'tari bridge. Artists sculpted renditions of the retribution piercing through a nebula. Military divisions restructured their survival and infiltration training programs, naming Jason Cross as the foundation of Lone Operator Doctrine. He wasn't a ghost story. He was a new chapter in the Terran playbook, one carved in blood and iron. But Jason didn't stay in the spotlight. He refused medals, declined political interviews, and avoided broadcasts. He spent his days in a quiet facility near Earth's Arctic Circle, helping engineers break down the alien technology and adapt it for Terran defense. He never spoke much about what happened aboard that ship, not because he was ashamed, but because it wasn't a story meant for comfort. It was a lesson, a message, a warning. Alien civilizations that once viewed humans as primitive now watched them with caution. The Xal'tari ceased all abduction activity within weeks. Whispers circulated among galactic trade routes. If you anger the Terrans, they send people like him. And Jason's name, translated into dozens of dialects, became synonymous with a single word: consequence. And in the silence that followed, Earth stood taller than it ever had before. Not because of fleets or alliances or superweapons, but because one man reminded the stars that humanity did not kneel. They fought, and they remembered. The galaxy held its breath. The arrival of the Retribution in Terran orbit had shaken every watching species to the core, but it was Earth's next move that would define the era to come. For the first time in recorded interstellar history, a dominant alien race had been defied, not by fleets, not by negotiations, but by a single human who fought his way back from the jaws of captivity. And humanity's response was swift, unmistakable, and utterly unforgiving. Within days of confirming Jason Cross's debriefing and reviewing the ship's logs, Earth sent out a broadcast. Not a diplomatic message, not a plea for justice, but a declaration, a line etched in fire across the void. "We are not prey. Touch one of us, and you answered to all of us." The words echoed in every known trade language, translated into thousands of alien dialects, broadcast from every Terran satellite and outpost. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Earth wasn't requesting peace. It was drawing a boundary in blood. The Terran Union Council, once fragmented and slow to respond to galactic provocations, now moved with unprecedented unity. A unanimous vote reclassified abduction or forced experimentation of human beings as acts of war. No court, no trial, no diplomacy. Any species violating that edict would face total retaliation, economic, military, and ideological. The first response wasn't a fleet, but information. Jason had returned with a treasure trove of Xal'tari data, maps of their fleet positions, genetic experimentation logs, records of other species they had harvested for study. Earth didn't hoard it. They shared it with every civilization that had ever suffered under the Xal'tari's hidden dominion. Empires that once feared the Xal'tari began to reevaluate their allegiances. Trade networks shifted. Neutral powers armed themselves, not against humans, but alongside them. The Xal'tari themselves, humiliated and exposed, withdrew into their core systems. Officially, they issued a hollow apology, claiming Jason's abduction was a rogue scientific expedition outside the authority of the High Council. But no one believed it. Not after the logs. Not after the video footage of him trapped like an animal in a containment cell, dissected in dream harvesting simulations. Not after the audio clips of Xal'tari officers debating which Terran settlements to target next. The lie only deepened their disgrace, and their silence, once a tool of dominance, now became a cloak for fear. Earth, meanwhile, began restructuring its military doctrine. The defense fleet expanded, not just in size but in philosophy. Gone was the model of reactionary defense. The new Terran posture was one of deterrence. A single statement defined the shift. We do not wait for threats. We end them before they begin. Forward-listening posts were constructed near known Xal'tari borders. Intelligence satellites were deployed to monitor fringe systems where other species had mysteriously vanished over the years. Covert operatives, trained in infiltration tactics modeled after Jason's actions, began moving through the galaxy not as scouts, but as sentinels. Humanity had evolved, not just technologically, strategically, psychologically. The species that once looked outward in wonder now looked outward with purpose. Culturally, Jason's return sparked something deeper than protocol. On colony worlds, murals of his silhouette against the burning dreadnought became symbols of Terran defiance. Children in outer belts played games pretending to be ship saboteurs, whispering. Cross-protocol before ambushing mock aliens. Schools rewrote curriculums to include the incident as a historical turning point, while museums scrambled to acquire salvaged pieces of the retribution for permanent display. Songs were written, books published, films produced, not as glorification, but as remembrance. Because Jason hadn't come back victorious. He'd come back changed, hardened. His message had been simple, stripped of politics and pride. I didn't win because I was strong. I won because I refused to be broken. The legacy reached further than Earth. Allied species, those who had long endured in silence under the thumb of more advanced empires, began to rise. In the Arvon cluster, a once subjugated race called the Hyrene broke free from their overlords after hearing Jason's broadcast. On the fringes of the Thalen expanse, where humans had yet to explore, small planets began broadcasting in Terran Standard, declaring themselves friends of the species who fought back. Humanity, without seeking it, had become a symbol, not of violence, but of resistance. Their reputation was no longer that of newcomers or primitives. It was something far more unsettling to the old powers of the galaxy. They were dangerous, because they were unpredictable. Back on Earth, Jason remained away from the noise. He turned down every political offer, every invitation to join the council or lead a task force. He had done what he needed to do, and the scars he carried, some visible, others buried in memory, reminded him that the fight wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, psychological, existential. He spent his days consulting quietly with engineers, helping them reverse engineer the Xal'tari tech so that Earth could better defend itself. But he didn't speak often, because he understood something others were only just realizing. It would happen again, somewhere. Another species would forget. Another power would grow arrogant. Another attempt would be made to reduce humanity to specimens or servants or pawns. But this time, the galaxy would remember what followed the last mistake. Not negotiations, not reparations. A human in their engine room, flooding their ship with smoke. A human on their bridge, locking down their AI. A human who sent a message with stolen systems and a shattered voice. We are not prey. And in that echo, the future of Earth was forged, not through dominance, but through defiance. Not through conquest, but through clarity. Jason had returned. But more importantly, Earth had answered, and the galaxy would never forget either one. In the cold silence of space, where empires rise and fall without warning, one truth now burned brighter than any star. Humanity was no longer to be underestimated. The abduction of a single man had unraveled centuries of arrogance. Jason Cross didn't return as a symbol of revenge. He returned as proof that humanity's resolve could not be contained, chained, or erased. What was meant to be a quiet experiment had become a galaxy-wide reckoning. The message was clear. Humanity had been pushed. Humanity had bled. But when they were cornered, they did not beg. They built fire out of desperation, and they forged steel from pain. They did not send warnings. They became them. Now, in every shadowed council room, in every hidden lab, and aboard every warship that had once scoffed at Earth's name, Jason's story echoed like a blade sliding from its sheath. They had taken one of ours, and Earth answered. So let the stars watch. Let the old powers whisper and retreat. We are no longer newcomers. We are no longer curious. We are no longer prey. We are the storm they never saw coming. If Jason's story lit a fire in you, if you believe in the power of defiance, resilience, and the strength that comes from standing together, don't let it end here. Like this, if you felt every moment of his fight, comment and tell us, what would you have done in Jason's place? Share this story so the whole world remembers. We are not prey, and most importantly, subscribe to stay with us as we explore more tales of human grit, rebellion, and vengeance across the stars. This is just the beginning. The galaxy is watching. Let's make sure it never forgets who we are.